This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through the business news stories you need to know about from the continent and beyond. But first, a quick run through the markets here for you. So Kenya's NSE 20 really has been one of the laggards among the bourses we track on the program for most of the first half of the year, but it's rallied a fair bit since late May. It's actually now 5.7% higher on a year-to-date basis, effectively erasing all the losses early in the year. Nowhere near the main performance, though, of the indices that we're seeing at the JSE. They're all showing the top 40 up 15.1 and 14.4% respectively so far this year. That's roughly the same as the tech-laden Nasdaq. That's gone up by 15.4% over the same period. Here are your headlines tonight. Africa races to roll out COVID-19 vaccine production outlets. Yet again, Zimbabwe bans the export of raw chrome ore in order to spur domestic industries. And exports from most of Southeast Asia's biggest economies rise despite the COVID-19 pandemic. We start the hour in the world of healthcare. The World Health Organization is calling for a complete moratorium on COVID-19 vaccine boosters until at least the end of September. The head of the WHO, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, says that the move will enable at least 10% of the population in every country to get vaccinated. Tedros has also raised concern about poorer nations not being able to vaccinate their people despite accounting for more than half of the world's entire population.
I understand the concern of all governments to protect their people from the Delta variant. But we cannot and we should not accept countries that have already used most of the global supply of vaccines, using even more of it, while the world's most vulnerable people remain unprotected. Even while hundreds of millions of people are still waiting for their first dose, some rich countries are moving towards booster doses. So far, more than 4 billion vaccine doses have been administered globally. More than 80% have gone to high and upper middle income countries, even though they account for less than half of the world's population.
In the meantime, the United States has rejected the WHO's appeal for a moratorium on administering those booster shots that we've just spoken about. The White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki argues that the U.S. has sufficient supply to continue distributing shots abroad while also ensuring that every American national can be fully vaccinated.
We believe we can do both. We also, in this country, have enough supply to ensure that every American has access to a vaccine. We will have enough supply to ensure if the FDA decides that boosters are recommended for a portion of the population, to provide those as well. We believe we can do both, and we don't need to make that choice.
The International Finance Corporation and 4 other institutions have partnered with the Senegalese vaccine manufacturer in an effort to advance the manufacturing process of COVID-19 vaccines right here on the African continent. Under the terms of this agreement, the 5 institutions will support large-scale investments in vaccine production by the Institut Pasteur in Dakar, alongside other support measures. Now, this new manufacturing plant should also reduce Africa's near 99% dependence on vaccine imports and strengthen future pandemic resilience on the continent. The total cost of the project is anticipated to be around $200 million. According to the WHO, to date, only 1% of the African population has been fully vaccinated against COVID-19. All right, then let's explore the business of vaccine manufacturing with Dr. Ahmed Ogwel Omer. He's the Deputy Director of the Africa Centers for Disease Control, and he joins us live on the program tonight. Dr. Ogwel, thank you very much for your time this evening. So let's start with what one of the flagship projects that have been carried out by the African Union, the monthly rollout of batches of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine to AU member states, formally started today. Walk us through the broad highlights of the distribution plan. How many shots are going out each month and to which countries?
Thank you for having me. The distribution indeed started today, and it will go in phases between this month and the end of the year, and we will cover all the countries that have signed up to the AVAT platform that is run by Africa CDC, Africa Union, and Afreximbank. This month of August, we will distribute 6.4 million doses, and we will progressively increase that until we reach the 120 million doses mark by the end of the year.
So the final stages, as I understand it, of this vaccines manufacturing is happening at a facility owned by Aspen Pharmacare in South Africa. But are there any other facilities on the continent that could conceivably handle this kind of workload? If not now, perhaps in 6 months or 9 months' time?
Indeed, yes. Our projection is that apart from this particular facility in South Africa, we are working with other countries so that we can have, at the very least, 7 or so different manufacturing facilities having the full capacity to be able to manufacture COVID-19 vaccines on the continent.
What needs to be done to get to that point? Because, I mean, on paper, looking at the statement, we say we're doing the fill and finish process within the continent, but what do we need to scale up this process in terms of manpower and in terms of money?
Of the many things that are required for that to happen, 3 are key. The first one is to get the owner of an intellectual property, the owner of a vaccine, to accept for manufacturing to be done here on the continent. Second is to ensure that the facility that has been picked can actually be able to make the production in decent enough numbers. And third is access to the market. This means that the vaccines that are going to be produced can easily be able to accessed by the African market and beyond. So what needs to be done is known, and the timelines are such that we can be able to get these vaccines being manufactured on the continent within the next 3 or so months.
Quick follow-up on that. With respect to the question of access to markets, what sort of barriers are in place with regard especially to trade policy or tax or tariffs or imports and that sort of thing? What sort of barriers often do countries face in trying to import vaccines across borders?
Barriers can be divided into 2. One is production barriers, and then second is market access barriers. Production barriers, we already discussed some, and that is the facility needs to be in place. And policy within the country also need to be supportive of manufacturing of sensitive products like a vaccine. Secondly, within that first bracket is capacity, the technical know-how. You need people who know how to run the machines. You need people who can be able to ensure that the whole manufacturing process is solid, is clean, and is healthy. Now, the market barrier is one that we are already working on as Africa CDC and Africa Union, because when you manufacture, you need to get your products to be bought. The current regime, where a few institutions are the ones that are buying most of the vaccines, is not good for Africa. But using the platform of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, we are going to ensure that whatever is manufactured on the continent has a ready market through that platform.
So governments are not necessarily the buyers, or rather the bulk buyers of these vaccines, at least on the current setup. It's usually other institutions like UNICEF, for example, looking at the broader vaccine market, that tend to buy up most of the vaccines that come into the market across Africa, isn't it?
That's the current regime. It needs to be reviewed so that our vaccines that are manufactured on the continent can be able to have a ready market. 1.3 billion people is a good market, and it can be able to sustain several manufacturing facilities on the continent, so long as we address the issue of access to market and purchase of the vaccines that have been produced on the continent.
Indeed. Let me step back a little bit for a bit of history here, because as far back as 2012, the AU had worked on this pharmaceutical manufacturing plan for Africa, which aimed to essentially expand vaccine manufacturing and development on the continent in anticipation of a crisis just like this. But its implementation has been haphazard at best. What went wrong?
This is something that is based on how continental agreements are implemented by our member states on the continent of Africa. And usually during a crisis is when the gaps are seen. And this COVID-19 crisis has clearly shown us that that particular pharmaceutical manufacturing plan needed to have been implemented before. We are identifying what went wrong. We will fix it, and then we will use that plan to ensure that the next outbreak and the next pandemic is going to come when we are ready. This time we were not, based on the plan not being fully implemented, but the next one, we have learned our lessons and we will fix it.
Indeed. So IP is something you mentioned a little earlier, and it's often been cited as a problem when it comes to getting access to medicines. And we're seeing that now with COVID. But this is a two-part question. First of all, how difficult was it to get access to this IP, to essentially convince Johnson & Johnson, for example, look, license the tech to us, we can manufacture it here. But also B, isn't it well past time for African countries to be investing in their own pharmaceutical research and to start owning a part of this intellectual property as well?
Starting with your second question, the simple answer is yes. We are passing on the message to our member states on the continent that we must invest in R&D. If we are not doing research and developing our own intellectual property-based health products, then we cannot be competitive in the market. So there is need to urgently expand the investment in R&D for health products, and there is very urgent need to expand production facilities, because if you have a product, it has to be manufactured at scale for the market. So we need facilities that can be able to do that manufacturing. To your first question, accessing licenses to be able to manufacture on the continent requires negotiation. And this is what has happened with the Johnson & Johnson case. Indeed, that one is manufacturing under contract. It is not a fully licensed agreement. What we are looking for and what we are pushing at the World Trade Organization is for licenses to be released so that our companies here on the continent can be able to manufacture under license, and that way they can be able to adjust the costs to the government when they buy. If you're manufacturing under contract, you don't have control over the final price, but if you're manufacturing under license, you can be able to adjust the pricing, and that is our preferred mode, where licenses are released to manufacturers in Africa, and we can be able to produce at scale of the market that we intend to target, which is Africa.
Indeed, I'd love to continue this conversation, but we are running out of time. Dr. Ahmed Ogwal, Deputy Director at the Africa Centers for Disease Control, thank you very much for your time this evening. Now, still on the business of vaccines, Kenya's private sector is now set to start importation of COVID-19 vaccines. This comes after the government finally agreed to allow members of the Kenya Private Sector Alliance to bring in at least 1 million doses through government agencies. Here's CGTN's Wilkis Tanyabwa with the details.
Hardly 6 months after it launched its COVID-19 vaccine efforts, Kenya has administered just over 1.7 million vaccines to members of the public. Only about 2.4% of adults in the country are fully vaccinated. Kenya has also placed an order for 13 million doses of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and now it's taking yet another step to secure even more vaccines. The Ministry of Health has authorized the country's private sector to import 1 million vaccine doses.
We are likely to see increased coverage, because then it means we can have more vaccine in the country, even times when the government is not able to access the vaccine through the usual mechanisms, through the country donations, through the COVAX mechanisms.
In March, Kenya's Cabinet Secretary for Health, Mutahi Kagwe, had announced that no private entity would be involved in the procurement of COVID-19 vaccines. This was to reduce the potential risk of importation of counterfeit vaccines. Now the government has set up a mechanism to ensure accountability. Under the arrangement, the private sector will secure 1 million vaccine doses, but through a government agency. This will serve as a pilot project.
I think the government has worked very hard to ensure that we have the right controls, all the way from ensuring that the vaccines that are being imported are accredited vaccines. We now have controls around who gets the license. based on their capacity for the supply chain to import, to distribute, to administer.
Kenya, which has seen an upsurge in its COVID-19 infection rates in recent weeks, is looking to vaccinate a huge section of its population in coming months. Wilkes Anyabo, CGTN.
All right, and a quick run through some company headlines. Let's start in the world of telecommunications. Vodacom Tanzania CEO Hisham Hendi has stepped down. His resignation takes effect from the 1st of November this year after 3 years in office. According to a statement released by the firm, Hendi will be taking up a new role as a commercial lead in Vodafone Spain. He joined Vodacom Tanzania in September 2016 as the head of commercial business, and then he was later promoted to become CEO in August 2018. The Kenyan low-cost carrier Jambojet has announced plans to start flights between Nairobi and the DRC city of Goma from next month. The carrier says it will first operate 2 weekly flights on that particular route and then gradually raise it up to 4 flights. Flights heading to the coastal town of Lamu starting on September the 15th will also originate from JKIA in Nairobi 4 times every week. And Uganda Airlines has pushed its expansion plans to the end of the year, citing the pandemic travel restrictions on its intended destinations. The carrier flies regional routes like those to Kinshasa, Nairobi, Dar es Salaam and Mogadishu. It was set to start long-haul trips by July from its hub at Entebbe to destinations in Europe, India, China and the Middle East. But those have now been pushed to September and December. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Plenty more content coming up, including this. Zimbabwe bans the export of raw chrome ore in order to spur domestic refining. And Tunisia's president is calling on banks to cut interest rates. The details coming up shortly.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Nairobi. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back to the program. Let's head over to Zimbabwe. Authorities over there have banned the export of unprocessed chromium ore with immediate effect in a bid to support the domestic ferrochrome industry. Now, Zimbabwe does have the world's second largest chromium reserves after South Africa. The minerals are expected to boost the government's vision of attaining a mining sector worth at least $12 billion by 2023. Among the biggest chrome miners and ferrochrome producers in Zimbabwe is China's Xinhang Holding Group, which has announced plans to build a carbon steel plant over there with the ability to produce some 1.2 million tons of carbon steel south of the capital, Harare. That project will be operated by its Zhejiang Dinson Holding unit, which already has ferrochrome smelters in Zimbabwe. They can process roughly 100,000 tons of that metal every year. So let's explore this development in a bit more detail with Farai Mokutoya. He joins us now from Zimbabwe's capital with a bit more details on this story. So Farai, this is very far from the first time that Zimbabwe has essentially imposed a ban on the export of ore from the country. Same policy was reversed back in 2015 after it was imposed in 2011, and it was imposed even an earlier period before that. What's different this time, though?
Well, Ramah, thank you so much. Great to be on the show. I think the situation, the processed in the country because there wasn't enough smelting capacity. This time around, the situation is a lot different. There are 22 operational smelters in the country at this point in time. So clearly, there is a greater capacity and more players who've invested in the sector who are able to utilize this material to process it and value add it. Back then as well as what was in the
we do apologize for the quality of audio on that particular line. We'll try and clean that up and get back to you on that one. Tunisia's President Kais Saied has called on the country's banks and financial institutions to lower interest rates in order to make available much cheaper funding for enterprises. Tunisia has been facing years of economic problems, and that has been compounded by the COVID-19 pandemic and the ongoing political crisis in the country. From Tunis, here's Anne Joachi with the details.
The head of state called on the North African states, banking and financial sectors to make more sacrifices during this exceptional period and to stand by the Tunisian people.
I invite you to make additional efforts and to reduce as much as possible the interest rate so that a share of it would go to the national community. I think that is not difficult for you. I invite you to contribute in this historical national effort.
The Tunisian Professional Union of Banks and Financial Institutions announced that the public and the private sectors will follow the president's economic policies.
The president's pieces of advice are important and valuable on the role of banks and financial institutions in facing the economic, health and social situation. The solutions proposed by the president are our responsibility. We will follow these instructions to improve the economic and the social situation.
President Saied also received the governor of the Central Bank of Tunisia. The head of state noted that Tunisia is able to overcome obstacles with the will of its people and the support of its friends.
I want to talk to you about the financial situation. We have friendly and brotherly countries who are ready to offer financial support. This will help Tunisia unwind its financial imbalances and meet internal and external commitments.
On July 25th, President Saied sacked the country's prime minister and decided to freeze parliament in order to implement structural political, economic and social reforms. The North African state's president affirmed that there is no place in today's Tunisia for injustice, extortion or confiscation of money from businessmen, pointing out that economic rights are preserved under the law and the constitution. Analysts assert that Tunisia is facing an unprecedented economic and social crisis. The head of state declared that this difficult situation has been exacerbated by the political crisis in the country. Abdel Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
On to West Africa now. Forex bureau operators in Nigeria are feeling the impact of the central bank's latest move to withdraw their foreign exchange supplies. The central bank took that step after it accused the operators of inflating retail rates and in some cases engaging in money laundering. With the details, here's CGTN's Kelechi Emekala.
BDC operator Tunde Adetoba has been in the business for 8 years now. He's one of over 5,000 licensed operators who purchase forex from the central bank and retail to end users. But operators like Tunde now have to rely on other sources as direct supply from the Apex Bank has been cut off.
CBN allocation of foreign exchange is just one part of the business. So other parts of the business are going on, even though the intervention from CBN over the time has formed a major chunk of the business. But for licensed BDC operators, they can carry on their normal business even without allocation from central bank. For any operator that has been selling within the allowable limit, you will continue to trade from other sources and they continue to be in business.
BDCs were set up to receive a weekly forex supply from the central bank for onward sale to end users who need $5,000 or less. But the Apex Bank accuses them of illegally trading forex into millions of dollars, way beyond their limits. Some are even suspected of terrorism sponsorship. This has also affected the registration of thousands of other prospects who'd hope to start up their own BDC business.
The activities are making forex regime unmanageable by CBN, and it's their primary mandate. When the price of these currencies are not steady, they are going up and down, and And people that are meant to get what are complaining that they're not getting it. They have to act because, they're losing control of the economy, the monetary control of the economy. So you cannot say to them to, fold their hands and watch what was going on to continue. And also, don't forget, there were other charges about money laundering and terrorism financing and all kinds of other things. Once these things come to notice, you are expected to take action.
What's more, there are concerns that the dollarization is putting a strain on the naira and the economy at large.
To deal with the appetite of our people to dollarize our economy. People are preferring to hold dollar rather than to hold naira. And this is part of the speculative activities around the forex. So we need to find a way to dampen the appetite for dollar, to diversify the supply base of this dollar by diversifying the economy. We also need to manage the cost.
Nigeria is an import-driven country relying heavily on forex. Crude oil generates 90% of the nation's foreign earnings, not enough to cater to the high demand. With foreign investments and diaspora remittances experiencing a low, economic watchers advise government to intensify diversification efforts in order to ramp up forex earnings. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
On to Egypt now. The country is hosting the 9th edition of the Africa Food and Manufacturing Exhibition, which is taking place in the capital, Cairo. Some 140 exhibitors from 16 countries are showcasing their products in an event that looks to boost the continent's supply chains in the food and beverage, packaging and logistics sectors. CGTN's Yasser Hakim was there.
Traders and manufacturers in the food industry have gathered in Cairo to participate at the 3-day exhibition that has offered networking and opened up business opportunities in the past. But for a second consecutive year, travel restrictions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic have prevented most African companies from attending the fair. However, there were visitors from the continent who have still managed to turn up for the event.
I'm here in this exhibition to look for new ideas and new machineries, more especially milling machines for the agricultural product, and to exchange ideas, to see new things in terms of packaging, in terms of other new products. The exhibition is a very good one. Despite the issue of the COVID pandemic, we are able to come for the exhibition, and a lot of investment is being decided right now in this exhibition, because it gives opportunity for the suppliers and the buyers to have a meet, to have discussions, and to negotiate.
Intra-African trade is still below expectations, and the event is viewed as one of the key fairs to increase business in the continent. Already, Egypt is playing a major role in production and has become an export hub for food industries in the Middle East and Africa.
We are focusing very much on the African market in Arab countries. We export to Saudi Arabia, to Jordan, and we have begun exporting to Nigeria and Kenya. The National Export Council is giving a lot of support, especially logistics, by easing transportation to African countries, and covers 50% of the transport, or even 100% in some cases. The only hurdle so far is the ability to transfer money between producers and clients, and I believe states are trying to solve this issue now.
The exhibition is also trying to help resolve a drawback in the continent's food industry.
Most of these components that people are exhibiting or targeting to exhibit at the show are produced in Europe and Asia, not in Africa. So what we are trying to do is to get this technology from Asia and Europe and start implementing it in Egypt and Africa market.
Chinese companies, which have been regular participants in the conference, were largely absent due to COVID-19 travel restrictions. Nonetheless, there's still demand for Chinese products by visitors attending the 3-day event.
I would always prefer to source local ingredients for cost reasons and for logistics reasons. But yeah, we've been dealing with Chinese companies since for 10 years now. we've bought several packaging lines and several processing lines from 3 Chinese companies. So yeah, we've been dealing with Chinese companies for a while.
Sudan is interested to deal with 2 major markets, Egypt, China and India. They have suitable technology for suitable price for Sudan and Africa in general. Sudan delegate is looking to import or to buy so many equipment for food manufacturing and packaging in Sudan. So there is such a very big important area that is the packaging of fruits and vegetables, which Sudan is very famous with it.
Investors hope with the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccines, this will help intra-African trade pick up very soon. And this will allow the African continent to receive a supply of food products badly needed in these nations. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
All right, we're going to take a short break, but just before that, I need to bring you up to speed with some of the news that we're getting out of South Africa. The country's Health Minister, Zweli Mkhize, has basically resigned as Health Minister. A cabinet reshuffle is being announced at this particular point in time by the country's president, Cyril Ramaphosa. We're seeing reports out of the country. This is from News 24. They're reporting that Zweli Mkhize resigned after meeting the president. In a letter that he put forward, he's essentially saying, Mr. President, quote here, I remain committed to working under your leadership. It's an honor for me to serve the people of South Africa in our government's quest to deliver a better life for all. But I am mindful that it is imperative for you, Mr. President, to have a fully functional executive. I've not been able to fulfill my duties as health minister for the past 2 months, having been placed on special leave. That, of course, is a developing story. We'll keep tabs on it for you and bring you the latest here on the program. For now, time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. Exports from most of Southeast Asia's largest economy surged despite the COVID-19 pandemic. And Lebanon continues to struggle to recover after a year after one of the world's largest ever non-nuclear explosions.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 14 hours of rain.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Let's run through some of the stories making your headlines at this hour. Starting in Ethiopia, the government there says that more than 150 trucks filled with humanitarian aid have now gone into Mekele. The trucks had been stuck in a bordering town between Tigray and Afar. The Ethiopian Prime Minister's office spokesperson, Bilene Seyum, said that the government is working alongside the UN aid agencies to deliver aid to people affected by the conflicts in the northern end of Ethiopia. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa and the African Union have announced that the monthly shipments of Johnson & Johnson vaccines to EU member states started today. President Ramaphosa says this is a significant step forward in Africa's efforts to safeguard the health and well-being of her people. Johnson & Johnson will supply the African Union with up to 400 million doses of its COVID-19 vaccine. The former Mozambican president, Joaquim Chissano, has called on the government to consider dialogue with the armed groups operating in the conflict-hit Cabo Delgado region. He was speaking about the insurgency during an interview on state-owned Radio Mozambique broadcast on Wednesday. The former head of state said that the causes of armed violence in the province must be studied as a way of solving the military and social crisis in the country's north. And finally, Egypt is trying to organize a meeting between Libyan Prime Minister Abdul Hamid Dbeibeh and the commander of the Libyan National Army, Khalifa Haftar. Since the interim Prime Minister took office, the two individuals have not met, and that's raised fears of a future political crisis in Libya. The Libyan National Army, the LNA, even cancelled a planned trip for Dbeibeh to Benghazi, where it is based. That's a run through your headlines. Exports from most of Southeast Asia's largest economies are surging. Despite the COVID-19 pandemic, it does reflect improving demand from China, the US and the EU. But as CGTN's Ryan Melson now reports from Kuala Lumpur, it's a rare economic boost for countries that are still battling a pandemic.
In the second quarter of this year, Malaysia's exports surged 44%, driven by electrical and electronics, and commodities such as palm oil and rubber. It was far from alone in seeing robust export growth. Indonesia's exports of manufactured goods rose more than 33% in the first half, while Vietnam's exports grew 28%. Singapore too has seen strong export growth.
There was a very steep contraction in exports last year because of the pandemic. And because of the low base, we are seeing elevated growth numbers. The second reason is actually the increasingly robust global growth.
It comes as ASEAN countries are again having to impose restrictions on business and movement in the face of the most serious wave of COVID-19 yet, and countries are having to repeatedly downgrade their estimates for their economic growth for the year.
Unfortunately, the internal engine of growth, particularly domestic consumption and investment, they have been affected by the resurgence of the pandemic.
There are worrying signs on the export front too.
This surge in the cases has led to increased restrictions, including lockdowns, and the inability of some of the factories from being functioning in normal productive capacity. I think that will have an impact on the exports in future.
Another concern is that if restrictions on manufacturing continue, multinationals could look to shift production elsewhere. That's why Malaysia, for one, is going all out, not only to vaccinate locals, but also a couple of million migrant foreign workers, the bulk of its workforce in the key export industries. Ryan Meltzer, CGTN, Kuala Lumpur.
On the 4th of August last year, one of the world's biggest ever non-nuclear explosions destroyed much of the port in Beirut, but it also devastated big chunks of the capital. That tragedy hit Lebanon as the country was mired in its worst economic crisis in decades, with its currency plummeting in value, massive layoffs, and drastic banking restrictions. 1 year later, CGTN's Stephanie Freed explores how the economic situation in Lebanon has gone from crisis to a really severe crisis.
After the explosion shockwave hit Myrna, she walked 3.5 kilometers to the nearest hospital with shards of glass protruding from her eye and bones jutting from one hand. Over the past year, she has undergone 5 surgeries. She personally paid for 4 of those procedures plus physical therapy, despite Lebanese government assurances they'd cover all blast victims' medical expenses.
I can't afford it anymore. I take loans from people to pay for treatment, then go for surgery, pay back the loan, take another loan, get another surgery, work, pay it.
Funding and government initiatives are also in short supply for rebuilding and repairing damage. NGOs fixing homes and schools mostly depend on private sector donations. With the passage of time and the ongoing COVID-19 crisis, donor fatigue has set in.
It's going to hit the 1-year mark since the explosion, so funding has decreased a lot. Yeah, but there's a lot of work to be done, of course. It doesn't stop.
Corrupt, inert leaders are sinking Lebanon into what the World Bank describes as possibly one of the top 3 most severe financial and economic crises seen worldwide since the 1800s. The new normal? Widespread shortages on everything from baby formula to medical supplies to petrol.
Half the amount I put in gets burnt up, waiting in line to refuel. There's nothing I can do about it. This is Lebanon. I've been in line for 45 minutes.
Leaked documents point to numerous Lebanese officials who knew and warned about the dangerous chemicals stored in Beirut's port before the blast. But according to international organizations, Lebanon's government is blocking investigations.
The state needs help. It's broken and run by a group of corrupt politicians. You want to talk about the state?
To break Lebanon's current paralysis, regional experts are advocating the IMF, donor countries, and expats set up funds and initiatives, and a new government that represents the people be formed. Stephanie Fried, CGTN.
Utilities in China have started to use ultra-high voltage transmission tech in order to meet the country's clean energy goals. An ultra-high voltage power line running around 2,000 kilometers connecting the provinces of Sichuan and Jiangxi was put into use last month. As Yu Bokun now reports, this new tech will help the country tackle imbalances in power distribution across the country.
Transporting electricity from where it's produced to where it's consumed without losing too much the energy is a major challenge for grid operators. This is because places where the sun shines and the wind blows aren't always the areas that need electricity the most. This is where ultra-high voltage transmission lines have a big role to play. The Yazhong Jiangxi ultra-high voltage transmission project of the State Grid Corporation of China, a leading grid operators in the country, started operations last month. The nearly 2,000-kilometer project can transmit 40 billion kilowatt-hours of electricity every year.
以这个亚中江西政府800千伏直流特压工程为例
Ultra-high voltage transmission lines are a unique selling point. The Yazhong Jiangxi project has been set up with a total investment of 24.4 billion yuan. It will also attract additional investments of more than 100 billion yuan and provide jobs to more than 50,000 people.
So, what exactly is ultra-high voltage transmission? It's like 5G technology in telecom, but in the electricity distribution sector. The technology can carry electricity across vast distance with greater efficiency and is crucial for China's economic development.
The main function of this technology is to address resource imbalances. In China, the eastern region of the country has grown at a faster pace than the western region. A large amount of the renewable energy resources are located in western regions. So UHVs are a good way to tackle the resource distribution problems.
China already has a manufacturing and technological edge in this area. The first UHV was set up in 2009, and there are over 30 such lines already functioning in the country. According to a report by a think tank called Americans for Clean Energy Grid, China has added 260 gigawatt of interregional transmission capacity since 2014. That is over 80 times that of the United States.
制造技术都是国产化的。
Some core technologies include voltage transformers are entirely made in China. We have set international standards for several processes in this regard.
China is already a leader in UHV technologies. Because most of the major projects are built in China, it gives domestic companies several chances to sharpen their skills.
Ultra-high voltage transmission line is a major catalyst for China's 2060 carbon neutrality goals.
双碳目标下，到2060年，
Based on our calculations, by 2060, new energy will account for over 60% of the country's total energy mix. Ultra-high voltage transmission projects play a crucial role in meeting electricity demand in China's central and eastern regions.
A recent white paper shows that investment in the UHV sector will reach over 400 billion yuan, or about $63 billion in 2022. With so much potential, the sector is poised for future growth. Yu Bokun, CGTN.
Spain's government recently came out with legislation designed to protect the rights of workers in the gig economy, like delivery riders or online car-hailing drivers. They've all been working fairly hard during this pandemic. Though the move has generated a fair bit of controversy, the government in Madrid is determined to press ahead with its efforts. Here's CGTN's Rahul Pathak on the gig economy and its impact in Spain.
It's lunchtime in Madrid, and Glovo rider Julio Cesar is on the move. Julio is one of Glovo's 13,000 food delivery riders based in Spain. The work is hard, the hours are long, and during the height of the pandemic, it carried a high element of risk to their health. But throughout the lockdown, the riders were out on the streets delivering food, whilst the public were confined to their homes. Now, the Spanish government says it wants to protect the rights of these food delivery riders, so they've announced a plan that will make them employees of companies like Deliveroo, Uber Eats and Glovo, and that'll mean they'll be entitled to things like paid holidays and sick pay. It will mean extra costs for the delivery companies, and for riders like Julio, those extra costs will eventually affect him and his fellow riders.
It will affect our incomes for sure. We'll be having extensive shifts, but we won't see the effect of that in our payroll. We'll work more and earn less for sure. That's why I say this will slow us down.
Spain's ruling socialist coalition says the legislation, the first of its kind in the EU, is designed to crack down on the so-called gig economy, which relies on hundreds of thousands of independent workers for app-based services such as food delivery or car rides.
The government has a strict way of looking at this. They're not open to listening, working with the platforms and finding a solution, which for us is looking for a way of maintaining flexibilities, but giving the workers more social rights.
The status of those working in the so-called gig economy is a question that's being discussed all over Europe and not just in Spain. Britain's Supreme Court ruling that Uber drivers were workers and not independent contractors.
It looks like there will be a domino effect, and shortly other countries in the EU will make the similar decisions as the ones made by the Spanish government, with the council and support of the unions.
For riders like Julio, even though they welcome the extra job security the new legislation is supposed to give them, many will be reluctant to lose the freedom and flexibility that they currently enjoy. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
As the Tokyo Olympics enters its last lap, let's take a look at some of the other things that have been making news off track. For example, Chinese sports goods and tech products at this year's event. That's our focus on what's hot tonight.
You can spot many made-in-China products at this year's Tokyo Olympics, and many Chinese brands are proudly showcasing their manufacturing power this time, thanks to technological upgrades at factories. Let's quickly go over some of the products. Boulder Laser, a Chinese laser engraving machine producer based in East China's Shandong province, supplies machines used in making 5-ring metal logos for the Tokyo Olympic Games and Paralympic Games. The International Olympic Committee, or IOC, announced earlier that it had hired the Heng Yuanxiang Group, a Shanghai-based textile company, to make outfits for the opening and closing ceremonies for IOC members and administrators. Chinese sportswear maker Peak is supplying sports equipment for the basketball teams of Nigeria, Iran, and Germany in the Tokyo Games. During the Games, the firm is also displaying sneakers that have multiple functions, including damping, rebounding, supporting, and gripping. China-based Shandong Taishan Sports Industry Group is supplying mats for the judo events at the Games. Taishan also sponsored China's road cycling and track cycling teams, as well as the triathlon team with Taishan's Pardus carbon fiber bicycle. The company has participated in making 90 standards in the overseas and domestic sports equipment sectors. It is among the large number of intelligent made-in-China brands that have expanded overseas. The Tokyo Olympic Games also marks the 6th consecutive time that domestic table tennis ball producer DHS to be a supplier for table tennis games under a cooperation contract that the Chinese company signed with the International Table Tennis Federation. You will also find Made in China at the weightlifting competitions, where the barbells are sponsored by China's ZKC brand. The diversification of Made in China products shows a trend of Chinese firms moving from being marginal suppliers to major suppliers of high-tech and core merchandise for the global sports event. Analysts say that China's stable and complete supply chain, which has been relatively immune to the fallout of the global pandemic, partly fueled the booming demand for Made in China products during this year's Olympic Fair. Xia Cheng, CGTN, Beijing.
All right, then a quick update on commodity prices. So Brent crude still off the 2021 peak that we've seen so far, $76-17 a barrel, down to around 71 or so in today's session. But it's been whipping around this high 60s for a while now. It did hit that point on the 19th of July. Perhaps what's interesting, though, about this ongoing rally is just how incredibly restrained American shale producers have been. The Baker Hughes rig count, for example, has gone up by 45% so far this year in 2021. That sounds like a lot, but remember, that only takes us back to levels that we last saw in the middle of 2016. If that isn't restraint, I don't know what is. Here's what's coming up next. Google's first brick-and-mortar outlet opens up in Manhattan. We'll take you inside next.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent, to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis,
Cairo,
Juba, Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival, and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to the program. Google recently opened its first retail store in the heart of Manhattan. To many, it looks and feels like an Apple store, but experts say the company will likely have a pretty hard time being as successful as Apple has been in direct-to-consumer retail. Karina Huber has that story.
This video, produced by Google, announced the launch of the company's first physical store. It opened in June at Google's New York City campus that employs more than 11,000 workers. In a blog post, the company said, "This new space will be a natural extension of our commitment to New York City and provide customers with hands-on interaction with our lineup of devices and services." Customers can browse and buy Google's hardware, including Pixel phones, Nest products, Fitbit devices, and more, as well as sample some of Google's software.
You can ask questions, kick the tires on this new tech, have your broken products serviced there. So I think it's meant to be sort of an all-in-one, heavily branded, fun and interactive way to showcase their hardware and software.
The launch of Google's first brick-and-mortar outlet comes somewhat late in the game. Other tech companies like Apple, Amazon, and Microsoft all opened their stores years ago, with some succeeding and others failing.
Microsoft closed all 83 of its physical stores in 2020. Amazon currently has 24 bookstores among its brick-and-mortar outlets across the United States, all facing a downturn in sales amid the pandemic. Apple is the tech company with the greatest success in retail. It has more than 500 stores globally. The new Google store looks and feels a lot like an Apple store, but experts say it'll be tough to emulate Apple's success.
The odds are stacked against any company that's opening up stores primarily to showcase and sell hardware and equipment. I mean, it's been shown over time. You have basically one company that's done it well, and they've done it very well, and everyone else, they've had troubles.
Mark Saltzman also believes Google faces an uphill battle if it seeks to be as successful as Apple in retail. But he says the company can afford to take a gamble.
They've got lots of money in the bank. Alphabet's worth $1.6, $1.7 trillion. I think that they can wait and see how this is received. It seems to be very well embraced at this point.
Karina Huber, CGTN, New York.
Right, then a quick update through the currencies. The one we're keeping a very close eye on at the moment is the South African rand, 14.37 to the dollar. It's essentially gained roughly 2% against the dollar so far in the course of the year. But there might be some market moving news coming through in the next couple of minutes once the president starts to announce his reshuffle of the cabinet. What direction the currency will take thereafter is going to be particularly interesting to follow. We'll have news and updates on that right on the program for you tomorrow. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program in the last hour. Many ways to get your feedback back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.